They laughed at the veteran's strange steel shelter, until the storm came, and they were the ones pounding on his door. When a quiet veteran and his loyal dog built a bizarre, arch-shaped cabin on a frozen Montana ridge, the whole town mocked him. But the night the deadliest blizzard in decades struck, every insult vanished, replaced by desperate fists begging for shelter. This is the story of how a man they doubted became the only hope they had. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The bus rumbled into Timberline Valley just after dawn, its headlights cutting through the thin veil of mountain fog that clung to the pines. Cole Harrison sat near the back, shoulders squared out of habit, eyes fixed on the wilderness outside the window. He looked like a man carved out of the road itself, lean, weathered, carrying more weight in his memories than in his pack. At his feet lay Ranger, the old canine who had followed him through places far darker than these quiet Montana hills. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching, sensing the way Cole's breathing tightened whenever the bus jolted too suddenly. 3 years of treatment hadn't erased the sandstorms, the tunnels, the explosions, the screams. They had only taught Cole how to walk with those ghosts without collapsing under them. Montana, in all its cold honesty, felt like the only place left where he could breathe without flinching at the echo of war. When the bus hissed to a stop in the tiny main street, Cole stepped down with Ranger close to his leg. Morning light washed over a scatter of wooden storefronts, a gas station with a peeling roof, and a diner where a few locals nursed their first coffee of the day. The valley framed the town like a cradle. Towering pines, jagged cliffs, a sky so wide it felt like a place big enough to hold a wounded man. Ranger sniffed the air, tail low but alert, scanning the quiet street with the same disciplined caution he'd learned far away in Helmand. Cole placed a hand on the dog's back, the familiar warmth easing something tight inside his chest. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured. "New start, remember?" But the town stared back at him with a kind of tight, uneasy curiosity. A man in an apron paused mid-sweep outside the hardware store, eyes narrowing. 2 older women at the diner window leaned toward each other, whispering without subtlety. A younger guy by the gas pumps straightened, hands on hips, looking Cole up and down like he wasn't sure if he was seeing a neighbor or trouble. Cole felt it immediately. The shift in air, the judging silence. It wasn't unfamiliar. He had seen it in airports, grocery stores, waiting rooms. The look that said, "Something's off about that one." The look that said, "War broke him." He had hoped a small town might be different. He was wrong. As Cole lifted his duffel over his shoulder, Ranger moved closer, brushing against his leg in a quiet show of support. The dog had saved his life once, dragging him out of the dirt after the blast, refusing to leave him even when disoriented and bleeding. In return, Cole had fought tooth and nail to adopt him after discharge. They were the last 2 survivors of their unit. There was no scenario where one walked away without the other. Cole crossed the street toward the general store, wanting to ask for directions to the property he'd purchased, a lonely stretch of land on North Cliff Ridge. He could feel eyes following him, judging him, assuming things. A bell jingled as he stepped inside. The store smelled like cedar, dust, and old newspapers. Behind the counter stood a tall man with tired eyes and a jaw set a little too firmly. "Help you?" the man asked, not unkind but not welcoming either. "I'm looking for North Cliff Ridge," Cole said. "Bought a parcel up there. Need to know which road splits toward it." The man gave a slow blink, recognition dawning. "You're the one who bought the old Haggerty property?" He let out a small grunt. "Didn't think anyone would touch that land again," Cole forced a polite nod. I like quiet. You'll get it, the man muttered. Storms, too. Wind up there'll peel the skin off a man. Hope you're stable enough for it. The hesitation in his voice wasn't accidental. Cole felt the jab, but kept his expression still. Ranger took a step forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Cole, as if to say, "Watch your tone." The man stiffened. Cole exhaled slowly. Just need the directions. The clerk pointed stiffly toward a map tacked on the wall, careful not to get any closer to Ranger. Cole studied the path, memorizing every curve of the dirt road. As he turned to leave, the man called after him, "Hey, look, folks talk in a town this size. They say you're military. That true?" "Was," Cole answered. The man nodded once, but his eyes dipped toward Ranger's service vest. "Hope you're not bringing any trouble up the ridge. Last thing we need is someone who's unpredictable." The word hit harder than intended. Unpredictable. It was the polite version of broken, the sanitized version of dangerous. Cole didn't answer. He walked out without looking back. The morning air felt colder now. Ranger brushed against his leg again, a silent reassurance, the kind he gave him after nightmares, after loud noises, after memories clawed their way back without warning. Cole knelt beside him, pressing his forehead to Ranger's for a moment. "It's just us, buddy," he whispered. "But that's enough. It's always been enough." He stood, straightened his pack, and looked toward the ridge rising in the distance. Timberline Valley didn't want him here. It didn't trust him. It didn't believe in him. But Cole hadn't come to be believed in. He'd come to disappear. Not knowing that one day soon, the same neighbors who mocked him would be pounding on his door, begging him and Ranger to save their lives. "Come on, boy," he whispered. And together, they started the long walk toward the land no one wanted. The land where a storm and a miracle were waiting for them both. The dirt road leading toward Northcliffe Ridge wound through miles of pine forest, the kind that swallowed sound and daylight after just a few steps. Cole carried his duffel over one shoulder, boots sinking slightly into patches of old snow left behind from spring storms. Ranger trotted beside him, head high, ears tuned to every crackle of branches in the underbrush. The dog's presence alone kept Cole grounded, each soft footfall reminding him he wasn't alone in this quiet exile. After nearly an hour, the trees thinned just enough for Cole to see the ridge. The land rose like a scar, bare, wind-beaten, stripped of everything except stubborn grass and rocks that refused to erode. A collapsed cabin lay at the base of the hill, its roof caved inward as if crushed by a giant hand. A second structure farther up the slope had been torn clean in half, beams jutting out like broken ribs. The third, near the ridge's crest, was little more than a foundation smothered in snow. Cole paused. Ranger stopped beside him, tail lowered. "So this is it," Cole murmured. "Our new home." The wind answered first, a sharp whistle sliding down the ridge and slicing through Cole's jacket. Ranger growled softly as a gust tumbled loose snow across their boots. The land felt colder here, somehow meaner, as if testing him the moment he stepped foot on it. Cole walked toward the remains of the first cabin. The wood was gray and splintered, shredded at the edges. He ran his fingertips across the damage, picturing the people who had lived here before, what they must have faced, what they couldn't withstand. He didn't need anyone to tell him why the land had been abandoned. The evidence lay scattered in every direction. North Cliff Ridge didn't just break homes, it broke the people who tried to tame it. Ranger let out a small bark, catching Cole's attention. The dog limped slightly, old scar tissue along his right paw tightening in the cold. Cole knelt, rubbing warmth into the leg until Ranger relaxed. "Easy, buddy," Cole whispered. "We'll make it work. I promise." They climbed higher, the wind growing stronger with every step, until they reached the flat stretch of land Cole had purchased. A wooden stake marked the property line, half buried under fresh frost. The view was staggering. Below them, Timberline Valley looked peaceful, just a tiny scattering of lights and rooftops tucked between pine ridges. But up here, the world felt raw and indifferent. A place where a man either built something smarter than the weather or didn't build anything at all. Cole swallowed hard. He knew what the locals said. That ridge chewed through men tougher than you. That land is cursed. No veteran, no broken mind should be living up there. He tried to shake the thoughts away, but part of him couldn't help feeling the weight of their judgment. It pressed against old wounds, stirring memories he had buried deep. Faces, sand, fire, the thud of sudden silence after a blast. Ranger nudged his leg again, grounding him. Cole let out a slow breath. "Yeah, I hear you." He set down his duffel, unrolled a small notebook, and flipped through sketches from his military days. Temporary field shelters, curved blast deflectors, reinforced arch structures engineered to survive explosions and sandstorms. A design he had once dismissed as too ugly for civilian life now pulsed with possibility. And then it happened. As the wind ripped across the ridge, snow slid off a curved boulder just ahead of them. The angle, the way the drift broke apart without weight being added, the clean shed of snow. It triggered something in Cole's memory. A shelter he had once taken cover under overseas. The way curved metal sent shrapnel skimming instead of penetrating. The way it stayed standing even when the ground trembled beneath it. Cole's breath caught. A cabin with a normal roof didn't survive here because a normal roof wasn't meant to. But something curved, something arched, that would shed the snow, that would break the wind, that could hold. "Ranger," he whispered, eyes widening. "I know what we're gonna build." Ranger tilted his head, ears high. "An arch cabin," Cole said. "A shell over a home. Not fighting the weather, outsmarting it." For the first time since arriving in Timberline Valley, something warm flickered behind Cole's ribs. Not confidence exactly, but purpose. A reason to stay. A challenge worth taking on. He imagined it right there on the ridge, 40 feet long, wide enough to cover a full cabin, strong enough to laugh at the storms that had destroyed everything else. A place that couldn't be torn down, couldn't be crushed, couldn't be erased. A place where ghosts couldn't reach him. And then he heard it. Voices traveling up the ridge. Cole turned to see 3 townspeople watching him from the lower path. Caleb Moore stood in front, arms crossed, expression twisted with amusement and skepticism. "Looks like you found the graveyard," Caleb called. 3 families tried that land. Lost roofs, lost money, nearly lost their lives. Cole didn't answer. Caleb smirked. "But hey, we heard you're some kind of military engineer. Maybe you'll last longer than a month." The woman behind him whispered something, and the others snickered. Ranger stepped forward, growling low, his stance protective. "Control your dog, soldier," Caleb said. We don't need another unstable veteran up here. Cole's jaw tightened. For a moment, he felt heat rising behind his eyes. The familiar buzz of adrenaline, the tightness in his chest, the flicker of memory he struggled to bury. Ranger sensed it instantly, pressing against Cole's thigh, steadying him. Cole forced himself to stay calm. We're just passing through. Caleb laughed. Hope so. Nobody wants you living up here. Ridge will finish you off anyway. The group turned and started back down, still muttering. Cole looked once more at the broken foundations, then at the open sky above him. The wind roared across Northcliffe Ridge, cold and merciless. But Cole stood his ground. If they couldn't build something strong enough, he murmured, then I will. Ranger barked once in agreement. The ridge wasn't cursed. It was simply waiting for someone stubborn enough, smart enough, and broken enough to understand it. Cole gathered his bag, tightened the straps, and faced the land that everyone else feared. Come on, boy, he said. Time to build something that can't be torn down. And with that, he and Ranger walked deeper into the wind, unaware that this brutal stretch of mountain would one day become the only safe place left in the valley. The next morning, Cole stood at the base of Northcliffe Ridge with a notebook under one arm and determination simmering in his chest. The sky was a pale winter blue, thin and brittle, like it might crack with the wrong breath of wind. Ranger sniffed every drift of snow, ears twitching at distant sounds only he could hear. Cole flipped open the notebook, studying the rough sketches he'd made the night before by lantern light. Curved ribs, reinforced steel. A shell that wrapped around a cabin the way armor wrapped around a soldier's chest. He didn't know what the townspeople thought they saw in him. Lost cause, broken mind, unstable veteran. But the truth was far simpler. He had survived years of things meant to kill him. And so would his home. He walked Ranger down the ridge trail into town, heading straight for the hardware and supply store. The bell over the door jingled, and heads turned sharply, too sharply for comfort. A few customers froze, staring at Ranger first, and then Cole. Someone muttered under their breath. Another eased aside as if giving space to something unpredictable. Cole kept his tone level. Mornin'. Henry Lawson, the store owner, cleared his throat. Back already? I need steel panels, the curved kind. Also anchor bolts, concrete mix, and a few tools. Henry blinked. Curved steel? What for? Building a shelter. A shelter, Henry repeated flatly. Up on Northcliffe? That ridge eats shelters. This one will be different. A customer behind Cole snorted. Is that what the last three said? Another chuckled. Maybe he's building a bunker. That's what vets do when they've seen too much. The laughter wasn't loud, but it hit Cole like a wave, sharp, metallic, triggering the familiar sting in his sternum. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, echoing too closely to static radios from his past. Ranger sensed the shift instantly, stepping forward until his shoulder touched Cole's leg, grounding him. Henry raised an eyebrow. What kind of shelter are you making anyway? Cole opened his notebook and laid it on the counter. An arch cabin, steel shell. It deflects wind and sheds snow. Henry stared at the page in silence, then looked up at Cole as if the man had spoken a foreign language. You want to build a half-cylinder over a house? Henry asked. Exactly. Well, it's something. Will you order the steel? Henry hesitated. That's a lot of money, and a lot of work. And no offense meant, son, but folks here think you should take it slow. Maybe ease back into things. A softer laugh came from behind him. Yeah, wouldn't want him snapping and taking down the ridge with him. A few customers chuckled. Cole stood motionless, jaw tight, but he didn't respond. He had endured enough to know words thrown by strangers carried less weight than the ones he whispered to himself in the dark. Ranger's head turned toward the laughter, one low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. The people nearby stiffened, stepping back quickly. Henry raised his hands. Easy now. Cole closed the notebook and tucked it under his arm. If you won't order this deal, I'll find another way. Henry frowned. Look, it's not that... It's fine, Cole said. Thanks for your time. He walked out before the humiliation could settle any deeper under his skin. Ranger stayed glued to his side, alert and protective, giving one last look over his shoulder before the door shut behind them. Outside, Cole sucked in the cold mountain air, letting the bite of it steady him. He crouched beside Ranger, rubbing the dog's fur. We don't need them, buddy. We've done more with less. Ranger nudged his hand as if agreeing. Cole didn't waste another minute. He headed toward the edge of town, toward the old mining road he'd passed the day before. Locals had mentioned the mine shutting down years earlier, leaving behind piles of scrap metal nobody cared enough to haul out. The road was slick with ice, but the sun glinted off something in the distance. Rusted corrugated panels stacked in crooked rows like grave markers. Jackpot. The closer he got, the more he realized just how much material had been abandoned. Carcasses of old machinery, bent beams, steel panels long enough to be reshaped into the curved ribs he needed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pretty. But it was enough to start. Cole ran his hand along the edge of one panel. We can work with this. But nothing on Northcliff Ridge came easy. He tried lifting one of the panels, only for it to slip from his hands, the sharp metal catching his glove and slicing through into his palm. Pain flared bright and sudden. Blood seeped into the snow. Ranger whined sharply, circling him. It's okay, Cole murmured, wrapping his hand with a strip of cloth. Just a scratch. It wasn't just a scratch, but he'd stitched worse in the field without blinking. He looked around, gauging the sheer amount of steel he'd need to move, the distance to the ridge, the steep incline. The size of the task was overwhelming. Ridiculous. Impossible for one man to do alone, which was exactly why he had to do it. He hauled the first panel onto his shoulder, staggered under its weight, and took one step, then another. The metal pressed into bruises he didn't remember earning. But he kept going. Ranger trotted ahead, checking the path and waiting when Cole lagged. Slow and steady, Cole muttered. We've done worse marches. By the third trip up the ridge, his shoulders were trembling. By the fifth, he tasted iron and cold on his tongue. But something inside him pushed him harder than any sergeant ever had. With every load, he saw the arch a little clearer in his mind. With every step, he heard the sting of those mocking voices fading behind him. And that night, as the sun bled out behind jagged peaks and a thin layer of frost crept over the panels he'd dragged home, Cole stood on his land, sweating, bleeding, exhausted, and saw something no one else could see. A future. Ranger sat beside him, chest rising and falling in fatigue, but eyes bright with loyalty. Cole placed a hand on his head. We'll show them, Ranger, he whispered. We'll show them all. The wind howled across Northcliff Ridge as if laughing at him. But Cole didn't flinch. For the first time since setting foot in Timberline Valley, he wasn't just surviving. He was building. But North Cliff Ridge had a way of testing every man who dared claim it. By the second week, Cole's plan to haul scrap steel from the abandoned mine had become a grueling routine. Each morning, frost clung to the ridge like a second skin, the ground hard as iron beneath his boots. Cole woke before sunrise, stuffed a few protein bars into his pocket, checked Ranger's injured paw, and began the long trek down the trail. Every trip felt like walking through a doorway that led back into the hardest days of his past, silent, demanding, unforgiving. The mine site sat in a bowl of rock and shadow, echoing with the hollow groans of metal shifting in the cold. Cole would search through rusted heaps, choose panels that were still intact, and heave them onto his shoulder one by one. He had to angle them just right, or the sharp edges would bite through gloves and skin. Even being careful wasn't enough. On the fourth day, he lifted a heavy curved section, and the metal slipped. It swung downward, carving a clean gash across the back of his hand. Blood splattered onto the snow, a startling red against endless white. Ranger barked sharply and pressed against him, tail stiff with concern. Cole hissed through clenched teeth, examining the wound. "It's all right, buddy," he muttered, though the sting was intense. He wrapped the bleeding hand with a strip of cloth, tied the knot with his teeth, and kept going. That was the kind of man he had always been. Patched up, stitched together, still moving. But the ridge didn't relent. On the seventh day, the wheels of the borrowed wagon cracked under the weight of too much steel. Cole spent nearly an hour kneeling in the snow, trying to fix it with numb fingers. A sudden gust knocked over two large sheets leaning against a fallen log, the crash booming across the valley like a distant blast. Instantly, Cole's muscles seized. His breathing quickened. For a split second, he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Helmand, sand whipping his eyes, alarms blaring, Ranger barking frantically as dust filled the air. Ranger pressed his weight against Cole's hip, grounding him. Cole let his breath out in a shaky exhale. "Thanks," he murmured. "I'm back." Later, when the wagon finally gave out for good, Cole refused to leave the metal behind. He dragged each heavy piece up the ridge by hand, gripping rough edges until his palms blistered through the bandages. Ranger helped as much as he could, gripping smaller sections with his teeth and tugging them up the trail, limping slightly on his healing paw. Every time Ranger stumbled, Cole's heart clenched. "Easy, boy," he warned again and again. "Don't push yourself too hard." But Ranger was a working dog, trained to endure. He didn't complain, only looked up at Cole with those steady brown eyes, as if to say, "We're in this together." By the 9th day, the cuts on Cole's hands had reopened, staining his gloves a deep rusty color. At night, he sat inside his temporary tent with a lantern flickering, sewing up torn skin with a needle and fishing line. Ranger lay with his head on Cole's boot, watching every movement with quiet worry. "You remember when I was the one patching you up?" Cole said quietly. "Tight spaces, dirt everywhere. You were always calm, braver than half the guys I served with." Ranger let out a soft grunt, as if acknowledging the memory. That night, a storm swept over Timberline Valley with no warning. Not a fierce blizzard, just a sudden violent downpour mixed with sleet. Cole rushed outside to cover the steel panels before they froze together. At one point, he slipped on the slick ground, the world tilting as the edge of a panel came crashing toward him. Ranger lunged forward, barking loudly enough to jolt Cole back to his senses. The panel slammed into the ground inches from his leg. "That could have crushed me," Cole muttered, sitting breathless in the slush. Ranger nudged his chest insistently. "You're right," Cole whispered, chest tightening. "I need to be more careful." But careful wasn't enough when the land itself seemed determined to break him. On the 15th trip up the ridge, a storm cloud settled low, covering everything in thick gray haze. The world shrunk to a blur of snow and rock. Cole pushed against the gale, carrying a sheet of steel almost as tall as he was. The wind shoved him sideways. His boots skidded on loose gravel. He went down hard. The steel panel landed across his shoulders, knocking the air from his lungs. Pain shot through his back. For a terrifying moment, he couldn't breathe. Ranger barked frantically, circling him, pawing at the edge of the panel as if trying to lift it. Cole forced his muscles to respond. Inch by inch, he rolled to the side, letting the weight slide off into the snow. His breath came fast and ragged. Ranger pressed his forehead against Cole's cheek, whining softly. "I'm fine," Cole lied, feeling heat radiating from the strain in his ribs. "We're okay." But exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Each trip up the ridge blurred into the next. By the end of the second week, he'd hauled enough steel to begin shaping the ribs of the arch, lining them in the snow like the bones of a great metal beast waiting to rise. One evening, as the sun dipped low, coloring the sky in bruised violet, Cole stumbled into camp and dropped to his knees from sheer fatigue. Ranger immediately circled behind him, nudging his back to keep him upright. Cole closed his eyes. The cold stung his cheeks. His breath fogged slowly in front of him. "Just need a minute," he whispered. But a minute turned into stillness. Stillness turned into darkness. And then, nothing. Ranger barked, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the quiet. The dog nudged Cole again, harder this time, then ran down the trail, barking relentlessly into the dusk. Footsteps pounded up moments later. "Cole? Cole!" Emily's voice cut through the haze. Cole blinked awake to see Ranger beside Emily, tail low, body trembling with worry. Emily knelt, checking his pulse, touching his forehead with the back of her hand. "You're dehydrated," she said firmly, "and exhausted. You can't keep doing this alone." Cole tried to speak, but the words tangled. Emily wrapped her coat around his shoulders. "You're going to get yourself killed on that ridge." He managed a faint smile. "Not with Ranger around." Emily looked at the dog, her expression softening. "He knew something was wrong. He came straight to my cabin." Cole swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the loyalty pressed against him on both sides, one human, one canine. "Let's get you up," Emily said gently. "Slow now." Together, with Ranger leaning into his leg the whole way, they returned to camp. And as Cole lay beneath his blankets that night, muscles aching, hands bandaged, Ranger curled close to keep him warm, a realization settled deep in his chest. This ridge wasn't just testing him. It was daring him. And he intended to win. The next morning, the sky over North Cliff Ridge glowed a cold silver, the kind that warned of a storm still weeks away but already gathering strength. Cole stepped out of his tent, his breath hanging in pale clouds, muscles stiff but mind sharp with purpose. Ranger stretched beside him, shaking off the night chill before trotting ahead toward the neatly stacked steel ribs Cole had dragged up the ridge one brutal trip at a time. Today was the day the arch would begin to take shape. Cole knelt beside Ranger, rubbing behind the dog's ear. "Ready to build something crazy?" Ranger barked once, tail thumping. It was all the encouragement Cole needed. He spent the morning marking drill points and aligning anchor bolts. Every movement hurt, His hands were wrapped thickly, and his ribs still ached from where the steel panel had slammed him days earlier. But pain meant he was still going, still fighting. The ridge's wind whipped around him, tugging at his jacket, swirling frost along the ground. But unlike the homes that had failed here before, Cole's arch wouldn't fight the wind. It would ride with it. He set the first steel rib into place, its curved shape catching the pale winter light. Ranger's ears stood tall, watching intently as if sensing the importance of the moment. Cole tightened the bolts one at a time, checking and rechecking the alignment. When the rib stood solidly upright, he stepped back and exhaled in awe. It stood like the spine of a giant, unbreakable, unyielding. A promise. Ranger trotted underneath the arch rib, sniffing it proudly. "We're getting there," Cole whispered. By noon, a handful of townspeople appeared on the trail, drawn not by curiosity, but by doubt. Word traveled fast in Timberline Valley, and nothing traveled faster than the suspicion that the new veteran on the ridge was building something impossible. Caleb Moore led the group, boots crunching in the frost, arms crossed and mouth already twisted into a smirk. "Well, look at that," Caleb called out. "Thought you were building a house, not a whale skeleton." Laughter rolled through the group. Cole didn't look up. "It's an arch frame." Caleb snorted. "Looks like something that's going to collapse as soon as the wind sneezes." More chuckles. Ranger stood stiffly beside Cole, fur rising along his spine. Caleb took another few steps up the ridge, studying the rib. "Tell me something, soldier. You planning to hide under that thing when the storms come? You think metal's gonna save you from this ridge?" Cole tightened a bolt, jaw steady. "It's not meant to hide. It's meant to outlast." "Outlast?" Caleb squinted. "Nothing outlasts Northcliff. Ask the 3 families before you. Oh, wait, you can't. They left after losing everything." A couple of the townspeople nodded in agreement. Cole straightened. All of their roofs were flat or peaked. Mine won't hold snow. It'll shed it. There's a difference. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "And you learned that where? In the war?" The way he said it, mocking, belittling, made something bitter twist in Cole's chest. Images flashed unbidden, dust storms swallowing bases whole, curved protective shelters standing firm while everything shook around them, Ranger dragging him through shattered concrete after the blast. "Yes," Cole said evenly. "In the war. Some things built for survival don't need to be pretty, just strong." Caleb let out a loud laugh. "Well, at least you know it's not pretty." More laughter followed. Ranger growled, stepping between Cole and the group. Caleb backed up quickly, raising a hand. "Hey now, control your dog." Cole placed a steadying hand on Ranger's collar. "He senses intention." "You calling me dangerous?" Caleb barked. Cole let the silence answer for him. Henry Lawson, owner of the hardware store, had joined the group but stayed behind Caleb, his expression unreadable. "Let him work," Henry finally said. "It's his land." Caleb scoffed but didn't argue. The group slowly dispersed, muttering under their breath as they went back down the trail. When they were out of sight, Cole knelt beside Ranger. "Good boy, but you can't bite the neighbors, no matter how much they deserve it." Ranger huffed, as if disappointed by the rule, then leaned his weight into Cole's side. Cole returned to the work, the interruption only fueling his determination. He lifted the second rib, bracing it against the wind, and hammered anchor bolts into the ground until the vibrations numbed his arms. Hours passed, and the structure began to take shape, a line of steel ribs arching upward like the beginnings of a sanctuary. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, casting long blue shadows across the ridge. Cole climbed a ladder to secure the top joint of the third rib. As he hammered, the steel hummed with each strike, echoing through the empty land like a heartbeat. Wind ripped across the ridge then, sharp and sudden. It shoved the ribs sideways, rocking the ladder. Cole's balance wavered, and for a terrifying instant, his feet slipped. Ranger barked sharply, pacing below, as Cole caught himself on the rung and steadied the rib with a trembling hand. He froze, breath hitched, as the echo of falling metal blurred into a familiar nightmare. The collapsing rubble, the ringing in his ears. Ranger tugging at his uniform to pull him out of the dust. Cole squeezed his eyes shut. Not again. Not here. Not this time. He gripped the ladder tighter, grounding himself with slow breaths. Ranger whined softly below, ears pinned back, sensing the memory clawing at his handler. "I'm okay," Cole whispered. "I'm okay, buddy." He hammered the joint into place with renewed focus, finishing minutes before the daylight faded completely. When the final bolt tightened, Cole climbed down and viewed the rising structure from a distance. 3 ribs stood tall now, their curves catching the dying light like the arches of a cathedral. A shelter, a refuge, a beginning. Ranger stood proudly at the center of the frame, his silhouette framed by steel and sky. "This is really happening," Cole murmured. He walked beneath the ribs, the air stilling inside the space, shielding him slightly from the biting ridge wind. For the first time, he felt the promise of warmth, safety, and something he hadn't dared hope for. A home. Ranger pressed against him, tail wagging slowly. "Yeah," Cole whispered. "We're building something that can't be torn down." Above them, the steel ribs hummed softly in the evening wind, as if the ridge itself were acknowledging him, not welcoming, but no longer denying him either. It was only the beginning, and by winter, the valley would learn exactly what that meant. By the time the 6th rib of the arch went up, Cole finally understood why 3 different families had abandoned Northcliffe Ridge. The wind never rested. It prowled the mountain like a living thing, snapping at clothing, rattling metal, howling through the skeleton of the rising structure. Yet inside the curved frame, even unfinished, there was a strange calm. The gusts split and rolled off the steel, leaving a pocket of stillness beneath the ribs. That stillness became fuel for Cole's hope. Early one morning, when the first glow of sunlight touched the ridge, Cole stood inside the half-finished arch and imagined the cabin that would one day sit here. Ranger padded beside him, nose low, tail swaying. The dog already treated the spot as home, circling the snow-packed ground, checking the perimeter like he'd done 100 times on foreign soil. "Yeah," Cole murmured. "We'll put the cabin right here. Strong walls, tight roof, and you'll sleep by the stove. You've earned that." Ranger nudged his hand, warm breath misting in the cold. With the arch ribs secured and bracing in place, Cole began hauling lumber from town. The small trailer he borrowed from Henry Lawson complained endlessly under the weight of fresh-cut planks. Each creak reminded Cole that this cabin wasn't going to be pretty. It wasn't going to be stylish or polished like the picture-perfect cabins tourists like to rent. It was going to survive, and that was enough. The first walls went up slowly. Cole measured each board twice, cut once, and checked the level 3 times. An old habit from the days when a miscalculation meant more than wasted lumber. Ranger watched from the center of the arch, ears flicking as every hammer strike sent echoes bouncing between the steel ribs. The arch amplified the sound, but it didn't frighten Ranger. Instead, he sat calmly, tail thumping in rhythm as if approving each piece installed. By the end of the first week, the outline of a cabin stood within the steel embrace, small, sturdy, and shaped with the same determination that carried Cole through every scar life had carved into him. But Timberline Valley wasn't impressed. As Cole hammered siding into place one afternoon, he spotted movement down the trail. 3 people stood farther down: Caleb Moore, his brother-in-law Vince, and an older man Cole didn't recognize. They weren't close enough to talk without shouting over the wind, but their smirks carried plenty far. Caleb cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey! You planning on living inside a tin can for the winter?" Vince chimed in. "Looks like a giant hamster wheel." The third man barked a laugh. "Bet the first big storm folds it up like a lawn chair." The words hit harder than Cole wanted to admit. Not because he believed them, but because Ranger stiffened beside him. The dog stepped forward, placing himself between Cole and the ridge path, shoulders squared. "Easy," Cole said softly. "They're not worth it." But the truth was, the comments stung. Every jab made him question whether he belonged here. Every laugh scraped against tender memories, faces of people who once dismissed him the same way right before everything exploded. He took a slow breath. Ranger gently pressed his head against Cole's thigh. The world steadied. The men left eventually, but their voices lingered in the wind. As the sun dipped, Cole lit his first small fire inside the cabin frame. The scent of pine sap and warm smoke drifted upward, mixing with the metallic cold of the arch. Ranger curled on the new wooden floor, paws tucked under him. The glow from the lantern cast long shadows across the ribs, creating a cathedral of steel and wood. Cole sat with his back against the half-built wall. For the first time since coming home, he didn't feel like he was running from the past. He was building toward something, bit by bit, plank by plank, breath by breath. He whispered, "We're doing all right, buddy." Ranger's tail gave a soft thump, but the ridge demanded more. Cole began building the roof, angled but not steep, since the arch would take the snow load instead of the cabin. Framing it inside the steel shell turned out to be harder than he expected. The angles felt counterintuitive, and every measurement required thinking in layers: wood inside metal, insulation inside wood. More than once, he caught himself staring too long at the bright, empty sky beyond the arch frame. It wasn't debris or gunfire he feared now, but the possibility of failure. The ridge had beaten stronger men who didn't have to wrestle their own memories while wrestling lumber. One afternoon, while securing rafters, Cole's hand slipped and he slammed his wrist against a beam. Pain shot up his arm. Ranger barked sharply, and Cole clutched the beam, fighting the flash of panic that followed sudden injury. He tasted dust again, heard distant shouting, felt heat, not cold. Ranger climbed the ladder's bottom step, whining softly. Cole blinked hard until the present returned. "I'm all right," he said, voice rough. "Just old ghosts." The next day brought Emily Carter up the ridge. She carried a thermos and a small basket covered with cloth. "You look like you've been through a war," she said gently. Cole huffed a dry laugh. "Been through 2. She set the basket on a crate. "I made stew. Thought you and Ranger might eat something warm that didn't come from a can." Ranger trotted up to her, sniffed the basket, then sat politely beside her leg. Emily laughed and scratched behind his ears. Cole looked around at the rising walls. "It's slow work. No one else would have gotten this far," Emily said. "You're building something incredible." His throat tightened a little. "Not everyone thinks that." "I know," she replied softly. "But people like Caleb don't understand the difference between stubborn and strong." She left after a short while, and Cole watched her trail disappear down the ridge. Ranger nudged the stew basket, tail wagging. "All right," Cole chuckled. "Let's eat." The food warmed him more than he'd expected. The kindness warmed him even more. Day by day, the cabin grew. 2 rooms instead of 1, a small loft for storage, windows carefully cut to catch morning light. The porch, though sheltered under the arch, gave the place a sense of comfort, like a home rather than a bunker. Still, the townspeople continued their ridicule whenever they hiked up to gawk. Some took pictures. Others joked about starting bets on when the arch would collapse. Cole ignored them all, because he could feel something they couldn't: stability, strength, shelter. But it was the firewood stacked along the interior walls of the arch in thick, towering piles that began to turn whispers into outright disbelief. Cole cut wood sunrise to sundown, splitting logs until his shoulders throbbed, hauling them into the arch to protect them from moisture. Ranger dragged branches, carrying smaller pieces in his mouth, even when his limp grew noticeable. By December, the firewood walls were nearly complete. Massive barriers of neatly stacked logs lining both sides of the cabin, dry and ready. Henry Lawson visited again, staring wide-eyed. "That's enough wood to last 3 winters." "That's the point," Cole said. Henry shook his head slowly. "Storms hit harder up here. You're either crazy or a genius." Cole didn't answer, but the ridge did. Wind howled briefly, a warning. Snow blew across the sky in a thin, early veil. Winter was coming early, harsher than anyone expected. And for Cole and Ranger, it would bring the first true test of everything they'd built. 2 days after Henry's visit, the temperature dropped so sharply it felt as though Timberline Valley had stepped straight into January overnight. The sky turned a cold, bruised gray, heavy enough to make the air feel thick. Cole woke before dawn to silence, deep, eerie silence, broken only by Ranger's low, uneasy rumble. When Cole stepped outside the cabin, he understood why. A wall of clouds crept over the ridge like a living shadow, dragging the light out of the sky. Not drifting, rolling, devouring. It was the kind of formation soldiers learned to fear in deserts and mountains alike. A storm with its own heartbeat. "This is it," Cole murmured. Ranger pressed against his leg, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. The air tasted metallic. Cole made his rounds quickly, checking the anchor bolts on the arch, tapping each rib to feel its tension, pushing on the cabin walls to ensure the structure didn't shift under pressure. Everything held. Everything was ready. But readiness didn't stop the chill crawling up his spine. By mid-morning, the wind began. Not the playful gusts that teased at clothing, but a long, rising roar that climbed the ridge with a predator's patience. It hit the arch first, slamming into the steel with a deep, vibrating hum. Snow lifted from the ground in spirals, dancing like white ghosts around the cabin. Inside the arch, however, the difference was immediate. The steel shell deflected the gusts, splitting them and sending them sliding along the curve. The air stilled. It was like standing inside the eye of a storm that had not yet arrived. "Just like it's supposed to work," Cole whispered. But Ranger wasn't convinced. The dog stood at the arch entrance, staring out at the horizon with unblinking intensity. By noon, the first flakes fell. Big, heavy, wet, turning the ridge into a blur of white. The wind whistled layers over the arch, and the snow clung briefly before sliding off in clean ribbons. Still, Cole felt uneasy. He'd seen storms shift from manageable to monstrous in minutes. He carried firewood inside the cabin and lit the stove. Ranger lay nearby, but his ears twitched with every distant thud of wind. "Sit," Cole said gently. Ranger sat, but his gaze never left the window. As the afternoon darkened into premature evening, the storm intensified. The winds howled across Northcliffe Ridge with a fury that rattled even the steel bones of the arch. Snow hit the metal like handfuls of gravel. The sky turned to swirling white, no horizon, no ground, just the storm swallowing the world outside. Then came the sound that froze Cole in place. A low, muffled creak. Not from the arch, no. This came from within him, deep in memory. A flash of heat behind his eyes. Ranger barking over sandstorms. The sudden shift of weight before a blast. The ringing, the dust, the collapse. Cole slammed his eyes shut, gripping the table to stay grounded. Ranger leapt to his side, whining, pressing against him with insistent strength. "I'm here," Cole whispered hoarsely. "I'm here, not there. I'm here." He knelt, one hand grabbing fistfuls of Ranger's fur, feeling the warmth, the steadiness, the realness. Slow breaths, slow return. Outside, the wind shrieked again, long, high, like metal tearing. Cole stood slowly, clearing his throat. "All right, storm's trying to scare us. Let's show it we're not moving." Ranger barked once, sharper this time, confidence returning. As night settled, the storm evolved from fierce to brutal. The cabin shook faintly, but the arch held firm. Snow piled on top of the shell, only long enough to be swept off again by the wind's sharp edge. The design was doing exactly what Cole hoped, but he knew this was only the first wave. Around midnight, Cole dressed in his heavy coat and stepped outside into the arch's sheltered space. The wind thrashed just beyond the threshold, but inside the shell, the air was unbelievably calm. The snow didn't touch him. The ground was bare around the cabin, while the world outside was buried inch by inch. He walked to the entrance of the arch and looked out. What he saw made him step back. The valley below was nearly invisible. Snow spiraled in violent columns, bending sideways under wind strong enough to shake trees. Even through the blinding white haze, Cole could see roofs losing shingles, power lines swaying dangerously, and distant lights flickering across Timberline Valley. This wasn't just an early winter storm. It was a warning. Ranger stood beside him, fur whipping in the wind swirling outside the arch. But he didn't retreat, not while Cole was still there. "Come on," Cole said, patting his side. "Nothing more we can do out here." Back in the cabin, he added wood to the stove and checked his radio. The frequencies crackled with static, every channel drowned by the storm. It wasn't until the third attempt that a voice cut through. "Whiteout conditions. Roads closed. Stay indoors. Do not attempt travel. Wind speeds exceeding—" The message cut out, swallowed by static. Cole sat back, staring at the radio. "What do you think, boy?" he asked softly. "Is this the start of something bigger?" Ranger rested his head on Cole's knee, giving a quiet huff. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. The windows trembled. The arch groaned but stayed strong, and the cabin, small, warm, and stubborn, held its ground. Near dawn, a sudden boom echoed outside, distant but unmistakable. Ranger snapped upright, growling low. Cole grabbed his coat and rushed out to the arch entrance again. A glow lit the valley below. A fire. Something large. Something important. But the storm swallowed the rest, forbidding him from knowing more until daylight. "Whatever that is," Cole whispered, heart tightening, "it's not good." He closed the cabin door, stoked the fire, and sat beside Ranger through the final hours of darkness. The storm had arrived. The valley wasn't ready. But Cole and Ranger were. Because everything they had built, everything the town mopped, was about to matter in ways no one could imagine. When dawn finally pushed through the storm's thinning belly, it revealed a landscape twisted beyond recognition. The storm had carved the valley into a white wasteland. Snowdrifts rose higher than pickup trucks. Roofs sagged. Trees leaned at unnatural angles, their branches splintered under the weight of the night. Cole stood at the entrance of the arch, the pale morning light catching on the steel above him. Inside the shell, the ground was dry. The air, though still cold, was calm. His design had worked exactly as he hoped. But Timberline Valley had not been so lucky. Ranger moved ahead of him, paws crunching in the snow as they walked closer to the arch opening. The dog stopped abruptly, staring down at the valley below. Cole followed his gaze. The fire he saw during the storm was still burning. Thick smoke curled upward from the town's storage barn, a massive building near the center of Timberline Valley. Half the roof had collapsed, exposing flames licking at the remaining structure. The fire cast an eerie orange glow across the snow. Cole exhaled slowly. "That's not good." Ranger whined, pacing, restless. Cole scanned the ridge trail, steep, buried, obscured. There was no safe way down until the winds calmed more. For the moment, all he could do was watch. Hours passed. The fire eventually died, choked by snow and lack of oxygen, but the damage had already spread. Cole could see other roofs caved in under the night's brutal snowfall. A few chimneys remained, stubbornly upright against the devastation. By midday, Ranger alerted first, a sharp bark followed by a tense stance. Someone was coming up the ridge. Footsteps crunched through the knee-high snow, uneven and frantic. Cole stepped forward, bracing himself. The figure appeared a moment later, a man stumbling, leaning heavily against a walking stick, frost clinging to his beard. It was Thomas Grady, the elderly postmaster. Cole hurried toward him. "Thomas, you all right?" Thomas collapsed into the arch's coverage, chest heaving. He looked older than Cole remembered, far older. It's bad, Cole," Thomas gasped. "The whole valley, the roofs, the fire. People are stranded." Ranger pressed against Thomas's leg as if encouraging him to continue. Thomas wiped melted snow from his face. "The general store roof gave out. The boarding house, too. Families are without heat. Caleb's place is half gone. Folks are using what little they have to stay warm, but the storm destroyed most of the firewood stacks." Cole swallowed. He'd seen the valley woodpiles, small, barely enough for a normal winter week. But this storm wasn't normal. "Any casualties?" Cole asked. Thomas shook his head. "No deaths yet, but frostbite, broken bones, and now the fire. The barn was full of emergency supplies. Everything's gone. Cole breathed deeply, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Thomas's eyes drifted toward the arch. Your place. It held. It actually held. Cole nodded quietly. That's what I built it for. Thomas hesitated, then spoke softly. Caleb sent me. He said he's sorry. And he's coming up here with others. They need help, Cole. They need shelter. Cole stiffened. Caleb, the man who mocked him at every turn, who told him the ridge would break him, now coming to ask for help? He looked at Ranger. Ranger stared back, calm, steady, loyal as ever. Cole sighed. Anyone's welcome here. The storm winds picked up again as Thomas limped outside the arch, waving to the figures now emerging through the drifting white. There were 6 of them at first, Caleb, his wife Marla, and their daughter Rosie among them. The child could barely walk. Caleb carried her inside the arch, her little hands blue from cold. Behind them came more. Vince with his arm in a sling, the Jensen twins wrapped in blankets, old Mrs. Laramie leaning heavily on one of her grandsons. Cole stepped aside to let them in. Get them inside the arch. Stay out of the wind. Caleb stopped in front of Cole, chest heaving, eyes red from cold and smoke. I was wrong, he said, voice cracking. About everything. Cole nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was enough for now. The families gathered inside the arch, huddling close as the wind battered the metal shell. Ranger moved among them, checking each person, offering warmth and comfort. Children reached out to pet him, their frozen fingers warming under his fur. The shell amplified the storm outside, humming like a distant engine, but the air inside remained steady, shielded, safe. Caleb stared up at the arch ribs with disbelief. I can't believe this thing is standing. Cole looked around at the space. Dry ground, towering firewood stacks, the cabin snug inside its armor. It was built to stand, he said quietly. But the storm wasn't done with Timberline Valley. A sudden boom echoed across the ridge. Snow cascaded from trees. The arch vibrated under the shockwave, but held firm. Vince staggered to the arch opening and looked out. That came from the schoolhouse, he said, voice shaken. It must have lost another piece of the roof. Caleb rubbed his face, exhausted. This storm, it's tearing the valley apart. Cole stared into the white blur, the distant sound of breaking timber echoing through the wind. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who wanted to disappear. But now, looking at the terrified families gathered inside the shelter he built, he understood something deep and unsettling. He had built this for himself, but it was never meant to be only for him. Ranger stood beside Cole, eyes forward, posture alert. A soldier's stance. Cole whispered, Yeah, boy, I see it. The wind howled louder, shadows shifting outside the arch. The ridge groaned under the weight of incoming snow. Night was falling again, and the storm wasn't finished. But Cole was ready to face whatever came next. He had built a refuge strong enough to withstand the ridge, and soon the whole valley would depend on it. As evening fell on the second night of the storm, the wind's voice changed. It no longer howled, it screamed. The snowdrifts outside the arch grew into white cliffs, rising inch by inch, swallowing the landscape.
The arch vibrated with deep metallic groans, like a living creature bracing itself against the mountain's fury. Inside, lantern light flickered over fearful faces, and Ranger moved from family to family, pressing against shivering legs, warming cold hands, calming crying children. Then, above the roar, a sound broke through. Not the storm, not falling trees, not the groan of distant collapsing roofs. Knocking. But not just knocking. Pounding. Hard. Desperate. Fists striking metal with everything they had. Cole stiffened. Ranger's head shot up, ears sharp, muscles taut. The pounding grew louder, accompanied by choked voices. "Please, someone, help us!" Cole grabbed his coat and stepped toward the arch entrance.
As he approached, the lantern light from behind threw his shadow long across the steel ribs. Ranger stayed glued to his side. When Cole reached the mouth of the arch, he pushed aside the heavy tarp he'd hung to keep drifting snow from entering. What he saw struck him straight in the chest. A group of nearly 20 people, faces raw with cold, clothes shredded by wind, eyes wild with fear, crowded at the entrance. Snow clung to their eyelashes. Frost had turned their hair white. Some carried small children wrapped in blankets stiff with ice. A few hobbled on injured legs, and at the front, barely recognizable beneath layers of frost, was Caleb Moore. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but his voice cracked before the words formed. Marla clutched their daughter Rosie, whose tiny fingers were purple at the tips. A wave of exhaustion and humiliation broke over Caleb's features as he forced himself to meet Cole's eyes. "Cole," his voice shook. "Please, please let us in." Behind him, Rosie whimpered softly, a sound so faint Cole almost didn't hear it over the storm. Ranger stepped forward, sniffing the air, analyzing every trembling figure. Cole felt the dog's hesitation melt with a small, soft whine. Ranger understood before Cole did. These weren't critics. These weren't doubters. These were people on the edge of survival. Cole's chest tightened. For a moment, one short, painful moment, memories threatened to consume him. Sand, smoke, screams, a friend's hand slipping away. He tasted dust, heard the echo of commands shouted through static. Ranger pressed against him with quiet urgency, reminding him where he was. Cole blinked hard, clearing the haze. "Get inside," he said, voice steady. Relief washed across the group like a flood. Caleb nearly collapsed as he staggered forward, whispering a hoarse, "Thank you. Thank you." Cole guided families into the open space beneath the arch, helping them settle onto blankets and pallets near the walls of firewood. The arch held the storm at bay. The wind outside raged, but inside the steel shell the air remained calm, almost eerily so. As the new arrivals warmed up, Cole took stock. Frostbite on several hands and feet, 3 sprained ankles, a broken wrist, dozens shaking with cold. Emily rushed from one family to another, tending to injuries with the efficiency of someone who had learned to stay calm through chaos. Meanwhile, Caleb stood alone near the entrance, staring at the arch's ribs with haunted eyes. Snow still dusted his eyebrows. His face was red and raw from windburn. When Cole approached, he swallowed hard. "I don't deserve to be here," Caleb whispered. Cole crossed his arms. "But you are. I mocked you. I mocked this place. I told people you were unstable. I told them this thing would fall before Christmas." Cole didn't respond. Caleb's voice cracked. "I was wrong. Ranger stepped between them, nudging Caleb's hand, an unexpected gesture of reassurance. Caleb blinked, taken aback, then slowly placed his trembling hand on Ranger's head. Cole sighed. "We focus on staying alive first. Apologies come later." Caleb nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Not from the cold this time. Outside, the storm unleashed another violent blast. Snow blew sideways in sheets, covering the valley in a thick, swirling wall of white. The arch shuddered under the impact, but did not give. Inside, children huddled beside Ranger, burying their fingers into his warm fur. Couples wrapped blankets around each other. Families clung together, their breathing slowly steadier in the calm haven Cole had built. Cole moved between groups, checking the stove, adjusting vents, rationing wood, making sure everyone stayed warm. Ranger followed closely, resting his head in strange laps, letting frightened children lean against him, using his presence like a balm. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Caleb approached Cole again, his face etched with guilt. "Cole, there are more coming." Cole blinked. "More?" "They couldn't climb with us. There's an older couple from Elm Street, the Jenkins boy with the bad knee. Maybe others. If they're still out there." His voice trailed off. Cole looked toward the storm-choked ridge path. A wall of white consumed everything beyond 10 feet. Wind whipped so hard it felt like needles stabbing exposed skin. Emily overheard the conversation and stepped forward. "It's too dangerous, Cole. You can't go out there." "I'm not leaving anyone behind," Cole said. Ranger barked, short and sharp, ready. Emily's eyes widened with fear. "Cole, please. You barely survived building this place. This storm is worse." Cole placed a hand on Ranger's vest. "I've been in worse, and I'm not alone." Ranger pressed against him, steady and willing. Caleb stepped forward, shaking his head. "Let me go instead. I owe those people. I owe you." "You won't make it," Cole said factually, not harshly. "Ranger and I have done this together before. Search patterns, low visibility, harsh terrain." A memory sparked. Ranger pulling Cole from rubble, smoke flooding his lungs. Cole blinked it away. "Stay here. Help Emily. Keep everyone warm," Cole said firmly. He tightened his coat, checked Ranger's harness, and grabbed a rope coil and lantern. Emily's voice broke as she whispered, "Come back. Please." Cole nodded once. "Watch the stove. Keep the door shut behind us." Then he stepped toward the arch entrance, Ranger already braced beside him. He turned back to the families, frightened, shivering, clinging to hope. Every one of them watching the man they once doubted prepare to walk into a storm that had already destroyed half their world. Cole took one deep breath. Then he and Ranger stepped into the white void together. The wind swallowed them instantly. The snow closed behind them like a curtain. The storm roared its challenge. But Cole didn't flinch, because he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was saving. The storm swallowed Cole and Ranger whole the moment they stepped beyond the arch. Wind slammed against them with a force that bent Cole's posture forward, stealing his breath. Snow spiraled in vicious currents, blinding them to anything more than a few feet ahead. Ranger stayed glued to Cole's left side, guiding him with the steadiness of a trained partner who knew these missions as well as he did. Cole shouted into the wind, "Stay close, buddy!" The gust swallowed his voice, but Ranger felt the tension in the rope clipped between them. Moving through the storm became an inch-by-inch struggle. Cole leaned into the wind, probing the buried trail with a walking pole. Several times the ground dropped lower than expected, threatening to pitch him forward. Ranger would tug slightly, warning him before each unseen dip. After what felt like an hour, they saw a shape, barely a smudge against the white. Ranger barked twice, sharp and purposeful. A figure slumped beside a half-buried pine. Cole stumbled toward it and recognized Mr. and Mrs. Hendry, the elderly couple from Elm Street. Mrs. Hendry was conscious but dazed, clutching her husband's coat sleeve as if afraid to let go. Mr. Hendry's eyes fluttered open at Cole's touch. "Can you walk?" Cole asked, voice raised just enough to be heard. We'll try," Mrs. Hendry stammered. Ranger pressed his warm body against her legs, steadying her. Cole helped them up and secured a rope around both their waists. Step by painstaking step, he led them back toward the arch, Ranger guiding the line behind him. When the shape of the steel ribs emerged like a shadow through snowfall, Cole exhaled with relief. Inside, warmth and lantern light spilled across the ground. The families gasped as Cole escorted the couple inside. Emily hurried over with blankets, eyes full of gratitude. Cole barely had time to breathe before Ranger barked again. Once, then twice. More out there. Cole didn't even remove his coat. "Ranger and I are going back." Emily grabbed his sleeve. "Cole, please, your skin is freezing. You're pushing yourself too hard." "I won't leave anyone else out there," he said simply. Ranger moved beside him, resolute. Caleb stepped forward, shame still heavy in his expression. "Let me come. I can help." "You'll slow us down," Cole said, not cruelly, just honestly. "Stay here. Keep the others calm." And once more, he and Ranger walked straight into the storm. They found the Jenkins boy next, Luke, half buried beside an overturned snowmobile. His leg was injured, but he was awake, teeth chattering violently as he tried to stay conscious. Cole lifted him in his arms, grunting as the boy's weight shifted with the wind. Ranger stayed close, nudging Cole when the path veered toward a drift too deep to climb. By the time they returned to the arch, Cole's limbs shook with exhaustion. Ranger's fur was crusted with frost. Inside, the families cheered weakly, grateful beyond words. Emily met them at the entrance, tears shining in her eyes. "Cole, you're saving people. Do you realize that?" Cole didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. Too many still needed shelter. For hours, he and Ranger continued searching until the storm's force grew too dangerous to navigate. At last, Cole allowed himself to rest inside the arch. 5 days passed. 5 days of holding the line between hope and fear. Inside the arch, the world transformed. What had started as a lone man's shelter slowly became a community, a temporary town, a place that felt alive. Cole established stations the same way he had during emergencies overseas. Food area, sleeping area, injury care corner, warmth zones near the firewood stacks, and a guarded entrance, Ranger's domain. Children played quietly near the woodpiles, shaping tiny snow creatures out of slush brought in on boots. Ranger became their guardian, curling around them when the cold seeped in. They buried their hands in his fur, Giggling softly when his nose bumped their cheeks. Mrs. Laramie baked biscuits on a makeshift skillet. The Jenkins boy taught the younger ones card tricks once his leg was bandaged. Thomas Grady told old stories about how Timberline Valley first came to be, giving the frightened families something familiar to hold on to. For the first time in years, Cole found himself needed, not feared, not avoided, needed. Emily approached him on the third evening as he double-checked the insulation around the stove. Ranger slept nearby, feet twitching in a dream. "You're doing all this," Emily said softly. Cole shook his head. "No, we're doing it. Together." "You've given them hope," she insisted. "Look at them, Cole. They're calmer because they believe in you." The words unsettled him. He didn't know how to be believed in. On the fourth day, the wind went quiet for the first time since the storm began. A fragile silence fell over the arch. Everyone paused, listening. Cole stepped outside into the shell's entrance. The valley below glowed white under a cold sun. Snowdrifts towered like frozen waves. Many roofs had collapsed entirely, leaving splintered wood poking from the snow. Once beautiful homes were now unrecognizable shapes beneath the drifts. Caleb moved beside him, his face solemn. "That's the whole town." Cole nodded slowly. "The ridge took everything." "Except this," Caleb whispered, touching the steel arch. "Cole, you built the only thing still standing." Cole didn't know how to respond, so he simply looked out across the valley. A graveyard of rooftops, fences, and memories trapped beneath the storm. Behind him, Ranger pressed against his leg, letting out a low, comforting rumble. Emily approached with a clipboard of notes on injuries and supplies. "We can hold out another week if we ration well." Cole nodded. "We'll make it work." Because they had to. There was no other choice. And on the fifth day, as lanterns flickered and families huddled together for warmth, Cole sat on the cabin steps while Ranger laid his head on Cole's boot. Snow drifted gently through gaps near the entrance, carried by the last whispers of the storm. Cole looked around the arch, the families resting, Emily tending to a sprain, Caleb sewing torn blankets for others, children asleep against Ranger's side. He whispered, "We did it, boy." Ranger thumped his tail without opening his eyes. 5 days inside the arch had turned fear into survival, and survival into something deeper. It had turned strangers into a community, and it had turned Cole's crazy idea into the valley's last lifeline. By the 6th morning, the storm finally surrendered. Its roar faded to a ghostly whisper, leaving a thick, unnatural silence hanging over Northcliffe Ridge. The world outside the arch was buried under a blinding blanket of white, smooth, untouched, and frighteningly still. Cole woke before sunrise, as he always did, but the quiet unsettled him. Ranger noticed it too. The dog paced once around the cabin door, ears twitching, nose lifted toward the frozen air filtering in through the arch's entrance. "It's over," Cole whispered. Yet somehow, it didn't feel like victory. Families slowly rose from their blankets. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes. Caleb and his wife started a small pot of oatmeal near one of the portable stoves. Emily prepared her medical kit, expecting frostbite checks and wound dressings. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, but all eyes drifted toward the arch opening, toward the ridge, toward the world the storm had reshaped. Cole tightened his coat and stepped outside into the arched corridor of steel. Ranger followed instantly, pawing lightly at the snow near the entrance. Together, they walked into the pale dawn. The sight hit Cole like a physical blow. Timberline Valley, his valley now, lay crushed beneath mountains of snow. Homes he recognized instantly were reduced to lumpy shapes. Their rooftops caved in like crushed cardboard. The entire eastern side of the town looked flattened. Smoke still rose from the burned ruins of the supply barn, its black streak cutting violently across the white horizon. Cole inhaled shakily. Lord. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the heaviness of the moment. Footsteps crunched behind them. Caleb stood in the arch, face pale and eyes glazed with shock. Soon, more families gathered beside him, staring at the devastation below. My God, Emily whispered. Mrs. Hendry began to weep quietly. Her husband wrapped an arm around her shoulders as she buried her face into his coat. The storm had not damaged the valley. It had destroyed it. Caleb swallowed hard. If we'd stayed in town, Cole finished softly. You wouldn't have made it. Caleb nodded, tears gathering in his eyes despite the cold. Ranger gave a soft whine and nudged his hand. As daylight strengthened, Cole led a few of the adults a short distance down the ridge to survey damage from a safer vantage point. The snowdrifts towered higher than trucks. Entire streets vanished beneath the storm's fury. Timberline Valley looked as though it had been swallowed by the mountain itself. Henry Lawson's hardware store had collapsed completely. The school roof had sheared in two. The boarding house was gone. Even the church steeple had been snapped off like a matchstick. Emily covered her mouth, her breath hitching. We have nowhere to go back to. Not until we dig it out, Vince muttered. But we can't dig it out now, Caleb replied, shaking his head. Half the valley is trapped inside their homes, or under them. A weight settled onto Cole's shoulders. He knew this feeling. Responsibility. Heavy, demanding, unavoidable. He turned to the group. We start from up here. We create paths down the ridge. We dig where we can. When the road's clear, help will come. Caleb nodded. We'll follow your lead. Cole stiffened. I'm not in charge. Emily stepped forward, eyes warm but firm. You are here. Cole looked away, uncomfortable. He had led before, through chaos, through fire, but he never wanted to lead again. Not after what happened the last time he held command. But Ranger nudged him again, stronger this time, grounding him with a reminder of all they had survived together. Cole drew a slow breath. First we check injuries. Then we ration supplies. Then we plan. The families nodded, almost in unison. Hours later, as they settled into a routine of caring for one another, Cole began inspecting the arch for damage. He expected buckling or denting, but the structure was flawless. Not a single panel had given way. Snow had slid off exactly as designed, leaving the cabin dry, insulated, protected. Henry walked up behind him, staring at the steel with newfound respect. Cole, Henry said quietly, you could have taken that design anywhere. You could have made a fortune. Cole didn't look up. That's not why I built it. No, Henry replied, voice thick. You built it to survive. And you saved all of us because of it. Cole paused, wrench in hand. Henry continued, people are alive right now because you didn't listen to us. Because you kept going. Cole swallowed hard. Praise didn't sit well. It never had. It felt like touching a bruise that never healed. Thank Ranger, Cole said finally. He's the reason I kept my head straight. At the sound of his name, Ranger lifted his head from where two small children were using him as a pillow, thumping his tail once before drifting back to sleep. Henry smiled faintly.
We'll thank him too. As day turned into dusk, the families gathered around the central stove inside the arch. Lanterns cast warm, golden light across their tired but hopeful faces. Children leaned against their parents. Caleb and Vince repaired damaged coats. Emily stitched a wound on a neighbor's arm with careful hands.
And for the first time since the storm began, laughter, quiet, uncertain, but real, echoed inside the steel walls. Cole sat on the cabin steps, exhausted, watching the community take shape around him. Ranger rested at his feet, chin on his paws, eyelids heavy but watching everything. Emily walked over and crouched beside Cole.
They're alive because of you.
Cole shook his head slowly. They're alive because we work together.
Cole, Emily said softly, look at them. Really look. You've given them hope.
Cole met her gaze for a brief moment before looking away, uncomfortable with the weight of her words. He whispered to Ranger,
We did something good here, boy.
Ranger answered with a soft, thudding tail. Then, as Cole lifted his eyes toward the valley, broken, battered, but still standing beneath the snow, he felt something he hadn't felt in many years. A quiet, profound sense of purpose. The storm had taken Timberline Valley apart, but it had revealed something stronger in the pieces left behind. And Cole Harrison, the man the town once mocked, now stood at the heart of its survival. Tomorrow, recovery would begin, and nothing in the valley would ever be the same. The storm's final traces melted slowly over the following weeks, revealing a valley reshaped by nature's fury. What once stood as a quiet, tight-knit mountain town was now a scattered mosaic of ruined rooftops, splintered beams, and snow-packed memories. But within that devastation, something unexpected grew. Cooperation, unity, and a gratitude so profound it softened even the hardest hearts. And at the center of it all stood the arch. Cole's arch. The one they had mocked. The one that saved them. As the weather cleared and roads reopened, the state's emergency crews arrived. The sight of 27 people emerging healthy from beneath a steel shell stunned them. Reporters came too, scribbling notes, snapping photos, and asking Cole to explain how he'd built the only structure on North Cliff Ridge that survived untouched. Cole kept his answers simple. It's just engineering, he'd say. The arch takes the wind. The arch sheds the snow. The cabin stays safe inside. But the valley knew it was more than engineering. The arch had stood because Cole had stood, because Ranger kept watch, because a man they once dismissed as broken had held the line when the mountain tried to tear everything apart. By spring, recovery was well underway. Families rebuilt their homes, roads were dug out, supplies were replenished, and one by one, people climbed the ridge, not to mock, not to doubt, but to learn. Cole, Caleb said one afternoon, hat in hand, I want to build a shelter like yours, for my family. I want them safe. Cole studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll teach you. And me, Vince added. And me, Henry said. Us too, called the Jenkins boy, his leg finally healing. Soon, Cole found himself drawing diagrams on scrap plywood, handing out measuring tapes, and teaching townspeople how to bend steel, anchor foundations, and understand wind patterns.
They listened to him, really listened, in a way no one had since he left the service. And for the first time, teaching didn't feel like giving orders. It felt like giving purpose. Ranger adjusted easily to the new bustle around the ridge. The dog wandered from worker to worker, inspecting their tools, nudging them when they dropped something, curling at their feet during breaks. Children followed him everywhere, treating him like a guardian spirit of the mountain. The valley slowly transformed. Within a year, 12 new arch shelters stood tall, some smaller than Cole's, some larger, all built under his guidance. Travelers passing through timberline valleys stopped to stare at the strange yet beautiful steel giants gleaming under the sun.
The state recognized them officially as Harrison Arch Shelters. Cole winced at the name, but the valley insisted. "Your idea saved lives," Emily told him. "Names should go with the truth." Cole didn't argue. Not with her. Life settled into something warm and steady. Cole rebuilt his porch beneath the arch and added a second stove for group gatherings. Emily visited often, sometimes bringing stew, sometimes bringing books she thought he'd enjoy. The children climbed the ridge to play with Ranger almost daily. And then, one crisp autumn morning, Cole noticed Ranger didn't come to greet him. He found the dog lying beside the cabin door, curled peacefully in his usual spot. The sunrise painted soft gold across Ranger's fur, now more silver than brown. Cole knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on his back. Ranger didn't move, didn't lift his head, didn't thump his tail. The quiet hit Cole harder than any storm ever had. He bowed his head, breathing in deeply, letting the grief settle through him like a river thawing in spring. Ranger had been with him through deserts and mountains, war zones and winter storms. He had dragged Cole out of rubble in Helmand, slept beside him during lonely nights in Timberline Valley, and saved an entire town with unwavering loyalty. He had watched. He had guarded. He had loved. Emily found Cole an hour later, still sitting beside Ranger's body. She knelt silently next to him, laying a hand on his arm. No words were needed. The valley gathered that afternoon. Every family who survived the storm came to the ridge. Even those still rebuilding paused their work to climb Northcliff and stand with Cole as he buried Ranger at the entrance of the arch, the spot where the faithful dog had kept watch over them all. The grave was simple. A hand-carved wooden marker. 3 lines burned carefully into the grain. Ranger. He stood watch. A true soldier. When Cole stepped back, the wind moved softly through the ribs of the arch. Not cruel this time. Not taunting. Almost gentle. Like a salute. Henry rested a hand on Cole's shoulder. "Your dog saved our whole valley." Cole nodded, eyes misting. "He saved me first." The years that followed carried the valley into a new era. The arch shelters spread to neighboring counties, then across the state. Ranchers, miners, and mountain families built their own versions, stronger, smarter, safer because of Cole's design. Cole trained dozens of apprentices, teaching them everything he knew, asking nothing in return. Reporters came and went. Engineers wrote papers. State officials offered contracts Cole politely declined. He didn't want riches. He didn't want fame. He wanted the world to stand a little firmer against the storms. And he wanted Ranger's legacy to live in every shelter built to protect the vulnerable. Cole Harrison grew old inside the arch he built with his own bleeding hands. His hair grayed. His steps slowed. But the cabin remained warm, and the community he saved remained close. When his time finally came many years later, the valley honored him with a procession that moved from Timberline to Northcliffe Ridge, walking the same path Cole once climbed alone. They carried him beneath the arch, the same one that had saved their lives, while church bells echoed across the valley restored from ruin. They buried him beside Ranger. 2 soldiers, 2 guardians, 2 lives that shaped a valley. Visitors still come to Timberline Ridge, standing beneath the aging steel shell, running their hands along the cold metal that once held back the fiercest storm the valley had ever known. They whisper the story of the man who built a sanctuary when no one believed him. They point to the markers placed near the entrance. Cole Harrison. He built the armor. Ranger. He stood watch. And every winter, when the winds begin to rise and the snow piles high, the arch, weathered but unbroken, sheds its burden and stands firm, exactly as Cole designed it. Inside, the cabin stays warm. Inside, people stay safe. Inside, the legacy of a veteran and his loyal dog endures. Forever. If this story touched you in any way, drop a simple comment below, even a 0 or 1, so I know you were here. Your voice helps these stories reach more people who need a little hope today. And if you want to follow more powerful journeys like Cole and Ranger's, make sure to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting for you. Stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. I'll see you in the next one.